Welcome to Shelf Life from the Virginia Festival of the Book. I'm Sarah Lawson, Associate Director of the Virginia Center for the Book, a program of Virginia Humanities. Thanks for joining us. As we get started, I'd like to thank our partners for this event, the University and Community Action for Racial Equity, UCARE, at UVA, and New Humanities, a community-driven media project at Virginia Humanities. A couple notes before I hand the program over to our speakers. Please share your questions using the Q&A tab on Zoom. Also, this event has optional closed captioning, which you can turn on and customize at any time with the closed captions tab at the bottom of your window. If you haven't already read today's book, we hope you will. For details about how to buy it from a local bookseller or check out a copy from your library, visit vabook.org, where you can also watch past events and explore upcoming programs, including the schedule for the 2022 Virginia Festival of the Book, which will be announced later this month. While you're there, please also consider making a donation to support the festival's ongoing work at vabook.org/give. Now, I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers. Dr. Davarian L. Baldwin, author of In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, is a leading urbanist, historian, and cultural critic. He serves as the Paul E. Rather Distinguished Professor of American Studies and founding director of the Smart Cities Lab at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. Joining him is Dr. Jalane Schmidt, Associate Professor of Religious Studies at the University of Virginia, where she is also the director of the Democracy Initiative's Memory Project. Jalane is a scholar activist in Charlottesville, Virginia, where she teaches public history in different community forums. Dr. Baldwin, Dr. Schmidt, thank you for joining us for Shelf Life. Tell us more about In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower.
Everybody, how you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Davarian.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be back, quote unquote.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I should explain to our audience that Dr. Baldwin was a postdoctoral fellow here at the University of Virginia, where I am located and where the Festival of the Book is, here in Charlottesville, Virginia. You were a postdoctoral fellow at the Carter G. Woodson Institute for African American and African Research when you were doing, I guess, some of the initial research for this book. Do I understand correctly?
Actually, no, it was a previous book, but in certain ways, which I'll get to in a minute, there are ways in which my experience there had a profound impact on what became this book.
Right, because you were looking at, I believe, the settlement from the
Great Migration.
Great Migration, yeah, of Black Southerners in Chicago or something, which of course comes into, discussions about the University of Chicago and how it relates to its South Side neighborhood there, of course. Yeah. Well, can you tell us a little bit about, the title of your book is In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower, how universities are plundering our city. I mean, this is a very, it's a call, you're making a moral claim, it sounds like, with the very title of the book. And can you just tell us how you came to do this research and, anything you can say there?
Yeah, I really want to bring it to my Virginia experience. I mean, there are a lot of reasons why I did this book, but it took me some time to come back and realize the degree to which my time in Charlottesville served as prelude to what became In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower. The year was 2003, so some time ago. But even then, I would go running most mornings along Main Street. I lived in between the grounds and downtown. And I would run past the university health system. And the thing that struck me every morning was witnessing these buses crossing the railroad tracks that were full of Black women getting off, going to work at the hospital. And as I saw this, I was haunted and struck by this visual, and it looked like a ritual of constrained return. This experience of coercion on a feedback loop that even though I didn't know all the details, it was clear to me that we had been here before. The Black women, the railroad tracks, the university hospital scene was clear to me that it was simply the latest layer of a longer arc of this kind of spatialized political economy, that there were these layers of experience from the plantation to the factory to the campus as the latest stage of what we call racial capitalism. And that these various spatial designs were kind of containers of a human condition, from bondage bondage to Jim Crow to gentrification. And this is what I was witnessing. Again, I didn't have the words for it, but just the visual display of it was very clear to me. And this is contrasted with the slow crawl of revitalization inching west from downtown to the grounds. So as soon as I left, came all of these press releases about Seaville as the most livable, the hottest small city, the greatest college town, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized that I had borne witness to the scene of a violent crime. That the neighborhoods around the campus had been retrofitted into the playgrounds of what Richard Florida calls the creative class, whereby the campus serves as a planning model, a centrifugal force to coordinate clusters of housing, retail, and recreation amenities, including Black servants that can attract a growing cadre of medical, media, educational, tech workers, et cetera, which has nothing to do with education, all to the detriment of longstanding community. So when I take these pieces, and of course there are different variations on the story in different parts of the country that I explore in the book, this was a microcosm of this larger developing notion of what I call universe cities.
Yeah, that term that you use, and for our audience, I'll kind of spell this out. It's university, and city being CITY, the city. So what do you mean by this? What's the relationship between this kind of neoliberal, kind of post-industrial, university, that we have going on? What's the relationship between town and gown here? What are you encapsulating in that term, university?
Yeah, so it's driven by this powerful realization that all over the country, colleges and universities have become the biggest employers, real estate holders, healthcare providers, and even policing agents in major cities and small towns. And to be sure, this phenomenon, these universities, these colleges, they bring ideas and people together. They generate new innovations. They spark certain kinds of economic vitality. And in this, we have seen higher education's growing control over the economic development and urban governance of our cities and towns, or what I call universe cities. That's what it is. It's the rise of higher ed's growing control over the urban governance and economic development of our cities. But the other point is that there is also a cost to those living in the shadows of these ivory towers. Campus expansions also raise housing costs and displace residents in neighborhoods of color like 10th and Page, a decimated Gospel Hill, increasingly Fifeville, that largely surround these campuses. Campus police forces surveil and profile the same residents and are rarely held to public account. And higher education's broad control over labor can lower wage ceilings and suppress collective bargaining efforts for the largely Black and brown workers who have been displaced from these campus areas and only come to return to serve and work for this growing creative class of workers and students. And so the notion of universe cities is an opportunity to capture this larger, vibrant phenomena and begs the question, well, what happens in the desire to kind of retrofit and manage capital and labor in this late stage of capitalism? What happens when your city becomes a campus? When the campus serves as this model for managing, organizing, shaping, subordinating certain types of life in our cities and towns to serve and meet the needs of other aspects of life.
Okay, all right. I wonder if we can kind of scope out just a bit here to talk about, you mentioned late capitalism,
Yeah.
and if we can kind of scope out and talk about notions of the public good and of public funding. I mean, some of the, I think, most of the examples that you look at in your book, are private institutions, your own Trinity College. You don't spare even your own, your own campus, University of Chicago, NYU, Columbia, et cetera. You do have Arizona State,
Right.
in there as well. And of course, University of Virginia is a public university. But what is going on here in terms of notions of the public in the past several decades, and of public funding and notions about a public good that educational institutions are supposedly serving?
Yeah, so just real quickly, a little bit of history is involved here, is that after decades of white flight and divestment from our cities, there becomes a shift. There becomes what we call the Back to the City movement in around the 1990s. You have the children of suburban sprawl, young professionals that might have went to school in cities that usually fled as soon as they graduated, now wanting an urban lifestyle. So that's on one side. And so you have cities trying to capture the tax base that comes with those competing for those various individuals who want to come back into the city. On the other side, you have universities and colleges that are facing shrinking state contributions to their budgets and trying to figure out different ways to be entrepreneurial, different aspects of their campuses to monetize. So in this moment, you have this point of interest convergence between university administrators and city leaders looking to, when people come back to the city, what is their vision of urban life? Fully wired, coffee shops, density, foot traffic, lectures, art museums, basically a campus. So in this moment, you have the transferring of public goods and authority from city leaders to universities as a means of pushing forward this desire for wealth capture as young professionals and internationals are returning back to the city and cities are attempting to capture that tax base. The university becomes this powerful fulcrum upon which to make this happen at the same time that universities are looking for different revenue streams. And so then cities are ceding power, authority, spatial management to the universities and their leaders as a means of sedimenting, maintaining this capture. And if you look at a place like Charlottesville, even when I was there, and you saw, number one, when I was there, a number of the mayors had previously had degrees in architecture from the University of Virginia. And so you had the early run of the trolley, you had the building out of the downtown area around Market Street. But now you're seeing the slow and actually the rapid creep of that lifestyle from the downtown, going west to meet the grounds. This entire thoroughfare, this corridor, if you will, is an extension of a campus. And so what then is the meaning or the phenomena of the public good in that dynamic? What's happened is that public authority and public power have been ceded to either private institutions or public universities that are engaging in business and educational services with prioritizing their own university interests. Because the desire is to monetize their labor and their activities. So even though you have a public university like Arizona State or University of Michigan or UVA, public universities, with the closing down of public support, they are in many regards only public in name. They are trying to figure out ways to monetize. So this becomes really important. So the way they monetize is through what we call the knowledge economy, the utilization of academic research in a range of areas, from biotech to software industries to military defense weaponry, to produce a series of goods and services that can be sold on the market and returned to the university in the form of royalties. Now, the important point about that is that it's not just this labor production, but in order to capture the best and brightest students, faculty, researchers, and their families, you must convert the blocks around these campuses into amenity-rich playgrounds for those workers in order to draw them into these areas. And so the campus, after years of campuses turning inwards during the age of urban renewal, now you have campuses expanding, moving outward in ways to reinforce and reflect their interests and ambitions on city blocks. And so then you find, even if it's a public university, public neighborhoods are being created, redesigned into this campus form to serve the needs and interests of public and private universities. This is most clearly manifest in the notion or in the reality that universities, public and private, the land that they hold is largely tax exempt. So and it's tax exempt because of the presumption that what's going on the campus is for educational purposes.
Public good.
Right, performing a public good. But in this new knowledge economy regime, what's actually taking place increasingly on these campus blocks is for profit industry work, research and development that is being put in the private market. So then ultimately what these campus blocks become are financial tax shelters for universities and their private partners. Mm-hmm. It's what I call the public good paradox. Right.
Right.
The moment where public goods and services, the presumption of offering a public good precisely becomes a way to transfer public dollars and authority for the private interests of universities with very little public scrutiny. And this happens in the terms of real estate. It happens in terms of labor, the apprenticeship system for graduate student labor. And it also happens in the realm of policing. The presumption of campus police, whether it be for public schools or private schools, offering community service. But again, policing in ways that are dictated by the interests of the university and not the communities that they're actually claiming to serve through policing. So it happens in a range of ways. And we can see this story unfolding in very explicit ways in Charlottesville.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've had done a lot of thinking, our community has here in Charlottesville, about, what would social justice, racial justice look like here, if this were informing city planning rubrics, that is, and what's the relationship of the University of Virginia to the community. We have a new president, who has, instituted his vision for UVA to be great and good, which has a, kind of a list of potential course corrections, we could say, that UVA can make vis-a-vis Charlottesville. Among them, the living wage, going up, although there's, questions remain about cost of living increases and mechanisms for that, if there aren't mechanisms, and then affordable housing, we still haven't heard yet where the sites might be, where UVA has said it will lease some of its university-owned grounds, for the construction of affordable housing, or what does affordable mean, even, or, and for how long, and this sort of thing. So yeah, there is this, I saw some, in the book, there were a number of universities that were kind of making efforts, some of them more hedging than others, some of them being accused of kind of almost a moral laundering, of kind of under the guise of, called community outreach and civic engagement, kinds of things. So that's not, so there is some skepticism, on the part of some, when a university such as UVA says, oh, we're going to pivot now and do this thing. Right. We recognize that, we need to, do some repair here, and what does that civic engagement look like? And what's is it just providing moral cover, or in some cases, was it the University of Chicago? I can't remember, that the real estate office of the university and the civic engagement office came under the, which is really curious there. Anyway, so what kinds of efforts are you seeing are being made, and with what varying levels of success, or what needs to happen here on from the university angle?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think that a lot of the efforts are kind of piecemeal and very selective, and they don't align. They still work under the framework of philanthropy or service. That if a university is doing, say, some affordable housing, some food service outreach, some tutoring, the things that we do, it's in the name of good and not most universities, and I think their legal teams are very clear about this, it's not out of responsibility. It's not because there is a direct relationship between the wealth and prosperity that is cordoned off on these universities and its direct relationship to wealth extraction that's going on in these neighborhoods. Like, for example, let me just give you an example. The tax exemption of universities with their property and the kind of wealth that's generated for private partners, that doesn't come from nowhere. That shelter, the tax abatement would normally go to the city and the surrounding neighborhoods in the form of things like public school support, road maintenance, bridge maintenance, public services. So the tax abatement is actually being extracted from tax hungry neighborhoods that are increasingly of color or working class. And so I just want to offer us that think about Charlottesville for a minute, think about UVA, one of the biggest, if not the biggest employer in the county. The UVA Foundation, biggest private landholder in Charlottesville. The UVA Medical Center, biggest health provider in the area, in the region. So the degree to which these universities that I'm finding all over the country are so pervasive in the everyday life, and yet we still talk about them. I say we're still enraptured with the myth of the schoolhouse, that we still talk about them as primarily educational entities, and they are not that. They are the new factory of late capitalism, and we need to engage them as such. And so 1,500 units of affordable housing is not enough, quite frankly. A living wage that's not coordinated with housing and healthcare reform and policing reform is not enough, quite frankly, because all these things are coordinated in terms of the ways in which UVA pervades the lives of residents in the city and in the region. Let's be clear, it's a regional economy, political economy, and in the region. And so a couple of examples that, again, have been piecemeal, but have been important and I think could be a part of a larger package, were very much so revealed when universities were forced to confront the realities of their role during the pandemic. So Harvard University, for example, they put their service workers on furlough, but the furlough only applied to those who were directly employed by the university. As we know, increasingly universities are subcontracting their labor. So there has to be some kind of policy that says that all employees of the university, whether subcontracted or directly employed, fall under the same contract. During the pandemic, residents in West Philadelphia were very concerned because when school is in session, this has a huge impact on the ecosystem of the neighborhood at the height of a global pandemic. There was no Amber Alert, there was no announcement, there was no protocol put in place about how the neighborhoods were going to be protected from the infusion of thousands of students and workers coming back into the campus to work. The only concern was with the vitality of the campus and not an acknowledgement that it's situated within a community. So greater COVID protocols that understand that the university sits in a community. During the pandemic, the University of Chicago began to, and every university cafeteria throws away tons of food every day to meet health code requirements. But during the pandemic, the University of Chicago began to package that food into healthy meals for communities of need. Why isn't this being done all the time? Right? The biggest example that I had actually was north of the border, and you probably read about this in the book, the University of Winnipeg. And their reasons for reforming or transforming their understanding of themselves, the university within the city, wasn't fully benevolent. It was because the demographic of their student body was changing. That they had the same kind of typical student body of the suburban white kids that come into the city, go to school, and flee out of the city before nightfall. But then in the 2000s, they had a drastic demographic shift where they went from 6,000 students to 10,000 students. And that additional 4,000 students were largely coming from the majority indigenous communities that surrounded the campus. And these are largely working class communities. And the students that were coming were adults with children and working class. And so they understood they instituted a new vision of sustainability that didn't just include LEED certified buildings. It included political, economic, and social visions of sustainability. On the ground, they understood that in order to capture these new students, we can't see individual students as these separate, discrete units, that they are reflections and connected to their families and their communities. So in order to serve and maintain relationships with these students, we have to serve and maintain their families and their communities. So they began to build out directly. They didn't hire an outside developer like UVA is talking about doing. They created their own internal development office to build out housing that was open to the entire city at different price points, from premium rate to market rate to affordable rate to rate geared to income. The only difference being that the premium rates pay for the rest of the building, with the only difference being balconies. All the other units are interchangeable. And then from the cultural side, the ventilation system has been refitted to allow for indigenous smudging practices. And then because they know there's going to be a mixed income community, the common areas have free Wi-Fi. You can pay for individual Wi-Fi, private Wi-Fi in your individual units, but the common areas offer free Wi-Fi. And there is a collective charging station for electric vehicles at the base of the building. Most of us in the food service have one of the horrible multinational food corporations like Aramark or Sodexo or Marriott or Chartwells. They realized that the food was not good, it was expensive, it wasn't sustainable. So they fired them and created their own diversity foods. On the labor side, 60% of the workers come from what they call hard to employ communities, LGBTQ, recently released from incarceration, indigenous, single mothers, and they're trying to move from not just having wages but also profit sharing. On the food side, almost approximately 70% of their raw materials come from small farms within a 100-kilometer radius. They have compost bins next to each workstation, and they send their cooking oil out to be converted into biodiesel. So this is a very different model, but it's a wonderful repost to administrators I speak to in the US to say, oh, this is pie in the sky, academic critique, what's your solution? Well, there are a number of solutions. When Chicago communities were facing the encroachment of the Obama Library into the Woodlawn and surrounding neighborhoods, they proposed a affordable housing and a property tax relief grant and fund. The point being is that as the Obama Library was announced, developers and speculators fled down to the Woodlawn area. It became the third hottest neighborhood in the city, a previously divested Black and brown neighborhood. And so prices were going up. Old, longstanding residents, grandmamas and aunties were not able to maintain their taxes. So they proposed a property tax fund to allow residents to be able to stay. That did not pass, but another policy passed that a certain amount of any new developments that uses public money and public land must include a certain amount of affordable housing units in those developments. So when administrators say to me, what are the solutions? These are some of the solutions. Another thing at Winnipeg, what they did was that they built a new recreational facility, and they govern it by a community charter, so that there are guaranteed hours, peak hours, so not in the morning or at midnight, peak hours, where community members have access, preferred access, to the campus recreational facility for a number of hours a day because of this community charter. So these are things we can do. We can have community benefits agreements. We need to have, and I know that Charlottesville is big on zoning and planning. Is there a community-based zoning subboard that has legislative power whereby any campus expansion must go before a community-based zoning or planning board before it can be passed? This is something that activists and community members in Chicago were trying to impose on the University of Chicago. These are solutions. These things are real. These things can happen. So that's what I see in the world. That's what I see as possible. But the most important thing is that anything that goes forward must be comprehensive enough to meet the comprehensive nature by which universities and colleges and their medical facilities pervade our life. It cannot be piecemeal because their influence is not piecemeal. It's comprehensive.
Right. I mean, we effectively live in a company town,
right.
Or at least here in Charlottesville, of course, in larger cities, such as New York or Chicago, there are, other employers, but here the footprint of the university in some of these locations is,
But
really,
even New York is the biggest college town in the country. People don't know that it is higher education is the new face of what we used to call finance, insurance, and real estate. So we have these layered economic systems whereby even the old dominant political economies are being managed and facilitated by higher education. So I just want to put that out there, but yes, you're right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, so we're, it's their world, we live in it. The question is, and I mean, of course, I am myself an employee, I'm an employee of the University of Virginia too, as well as a resident in the community that, sees the effects for good and for ill, too. If this is if these are, anchor institutions or, or we're in a company town or, this sort of thing, how do we get accountability? I mean, you mentioned, kind of, several measures, that were being taken there and, in Winnipeg and, how do we push for that?
Yeah. I mean, the only way to make this happen is collective organizing. The only success that I've seen in different communities and cities and campuses has been through collective movement. This was made very clear after the summer of 2020 and the various uprisings. It was powerful because the focus was on city policing. But then as activists, and this is right when my book was getting ready to come out, and I've been writing about this stuff, activists began to realize, but wait a minute, one of the major policing apparatuses in our city is not the city police, or alongside the city police, is also the campus police.
Yes.
And so the abolition movement or the police reform movement began to turn their eyes towards campus police as one of the most dominant forms of policing in cities and towns. And then as we began to discuss, and I began to work with activists and community members, they began to see more clearly how the policing apparatus is just simply the carceral face of this broader infrastructure of land and labor management and control. And so in a piece for the Chronicle of Higher Education periodical, I mentioned, what campus police must be abolished. And, UVA in the last, 7 to 10 years has been in the headlines where both private security and, policing, UVA policing their jurisdiction has been extended into the surrounding communities. There have been acts of brutality against I can't remember his name, but a Black youth on that main street commercial corridor where there's a couple
that was
of
the
bars.
alcohol beverage control, but but there have been incidents of,
But I mean, even though it's alcohol beverage control, that is the campus commercial strip.
Yes, right.
So there are these overlapping connections. So the point that I'm making here is that the reason why I argue that campus police must be abolished, because we say, well, what do they do? What's their primary function? The claim is public safety, right? But what are the biggest crimes on campus? Sexual violence, theft, and substance abuse. Campus police do a horrible job if you consider that to be their primary task. Some people might say it is capacity. I would say it's orientation. Because why? Because no school would want to publicize that they have a campus full of white criminals. So where are they? Where are they policing? They are policing, they're showing their force in the surrounding neighborhoods to demonstrate to potential students, families, and investors that this city and the surrounding town areas are safe for investment. So we have is a direct gap or contradiction between the claims and the function of campus police. they need to be abolished because they don't do what they claim to do, right? If we look at the actual camp policing needs of surrounding communities, it's public safety that has to do with housing and food security, trauma care. And yet you have these universities with these medical facilities that do not offer those services to the surrounding communities. That's what public safety would look like. On top of that, policing on campuses would require trauma care and preventative services. So in all functions and fashions, campus police are there to serve as the carceral face of what I'm calling these universities. But real campus safety would be food security, housing security, trauma care. What would it mean? Even before summer 2020, I spoke at length with Senator Mary Washington from the state of Maryland as Johns Hopkins was pushing to create a private security force. And she, even before the summer of 2020, she was saying, what would it mean? This the biggest and most reputable, the most famous medical center in the world, Johns Hopkins Medical. What would it mean for them to at least even pair a police officer with medical professionals and move through the city in a non-carceral, unarmed way? That would go much further towards campus or community safety than armed occupying forces in these communities.
Right.
So,
and again, the problem with the lack of accountability, that comes from, having those campus police forces, out in adjoining Black and brown neighborhoods.
It's created what some activists call to me a two-tier policing system, whereby a student and a resident will commit the same infraction, but the student is put before the dean of students, and the resident goes through the criminal justice system. So we're creating basically a new feudal system. These non-public or quasi-public entities, i.e. universities and colleges, have both economic and governing force over non-affiliated residents. At private universities, they're not even sanctioned by the Freedom of Information Act law. So they can police and don't even have to report their actions. They're not accountable to anybody but the board of trustees and the president. Yeah. And while public universities don't have the same reach, they police in ways that are meant to signal to investors and families that the area is safe, to the detriment of the actual public safety needs of the residents that they have been tasked with policing.
Yes, we've had that recently in Charlottesville with basically the Policemen's Benevolent Association ginning up some white parents who, to call in, and to pressure this, and then the university police chief, pushing to extend the jurisdiction out into adjoining neighborhoods. And that's just very recently in the last several months here in Charlottesville, and that's not unusual. Unfortunately, it's going on in a lot of places, as you document, in your book, most infamously at the University of Chicago.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so then what are they policing? They're policing the wealth that has been concentrated on these campuses in terms of research and development, in terms of the construction and maintenance of amenities for students, researchers, and their families. So if we walk down from downtown West to the campus down Main Street, some of these buildings weren't even there when I was there, but that almost fortress corridor of the Flats, the Lark, and the Standard, and these other luxury private developments on Main Street, they literally wall off 10th and Page and other neighborhoods from Main Street. Right, we're creating a fortress campus environment with the concentration of public resources, amenities, lifestyle experiences in these fortress environments, as the campus form is extended out into the city. And then what results in is the displacement of the previously existing residents. So as you all know, if you look at some place like 10th and Page, between 2010 and 2016, the Black population dropped from 72% to 57% of that neighborhood. And the median rents rose from $666 a month to $939 a month. This is on top of, say, in the 80s, when the medical complex moved into what was Gospel Hill. We don't even know that neighborhood anymore.
I know.
Moved into Gospel Hill. And again, those residents only return to the area to work and serve the residents.
These were the same ladies you saw on the bus. They probably used to live in Gospel Hill, or their families
or family members
homes in Gospel Hill that was eradicated to build the UVA hospital system, which again is not unique. That are supposedly public good associated with the university, kind of commandeers, what was, what little Black wealth there was, kind of in the name of, providing this public good. And that's the thing, with this meds and eds, as you call it, with the, kind of health system and then with education. I mean, both of these are, supposedly public goods. And this is the rationale for having a tax exempt university.
Right.
And yet, the tuition has skyrocketed again because of lack of state revenues, coming in because of neoliberal pressures. And then as has the cost of healthcare, driving people into bankruptcy, you know what I mean? That's they're supposed to be providing, healthcare for indigent patients.
That's right.
And they're supposed to be providing, a state education, but both of these, the costs have skyrocketed, and it just begs the question. Why is this a tax exempt institution? It really does, and interestingly, you note in the book, I mean, it's kind of curious, Charles Grassley, Senator Charles Grassley, Republican of Iowa, has raised this rather trenchantly, in the Congress. Of course, he's been part of the movement that has, kind of privatized a lot of this phenomena. It must be said, that there's a link here, but why do these institutions continue to be tax exempt if they're operating on a for-profit model? And they're, some people said, there's a hedge fund that grants degrees, or a real estate magnate that grants degrees. Why tax exempt still?
Yeah, I mean, well, the history of it is because they have been designated as 501c3 nonprofits. And the tax exemption comes from the presumption that they are offering services that would normally have to be provided by the government, i.e. education. And so the tax exemption comes from that. But what I'm witnessing, and what we're all witnessing, is that a much smaller aspect of what these institutions is offering is education. As what's actually going on here is real estate, privatized healthcare management, policing, and a low wage labor management. That's increasingly becoming the function of these institutions. And there's been this intellectual and conceptual lag between the claim, like I said before, the myth of the schoolhouse, this lag between the ambitions and the ideals of higher education institutions and the realities. And for good or for bad, both university administrators and their private partners in the knowledge areas of tech, med, bioscience, military industrial weaponry, they have profited and capitalized on this gap, this knowledge gap. And my desire, my ambition, my hopes with this book is to close that gap so people begin to see what's actually going on, what's the actual function of higher education institutions in our political.
Dr. Baldwin, kind of.
Or tenured radicals and snowflakes that is reserved for the liberal elite. But the actual physical footprint and the political economy of universities tells a very different story, that the very people they're attacking in higher education are actually the allies of these neoliberal Congress people and private profiteers. They're actually some of the same people. But again, the presumption is that this is the bastion of the liberal elite, and the political and economic footprint of higher education tells a very different story. And this is where the critique and the possibility diverge. Well, we might share, they might find solace in my critique. I'm invested. I believe in higher education. I believe there's capacity, that precisely because it's consolidated all these aspects of our lives, it is this powerful site for the transformation of what we can do. That if it's going to have this impact, But at the same time, we're gonna have this claims about higher education offering a public good. Then be a site for offering mixed affordable housing. Be a site for creating living wages with benefits that run 12 months instead of 9 months of the year. Be a site that converts discarded food into healthy meals for communities of need. Be a site that is governed by community charters, whereby the campus becomes a commons for the community that surrounds it. Be a site whereby you are allowed to have your tax exemption, but it's predicated on the degree to which your tax exempt endowments and your physical footprint has an impact, a positive impact on the surrounding communities. So I'm not anti-university, but I believe that it's precisely because of this consolidation of power that combined with the claims of public good, that it can become this location for actual liberatory transformation. And then in the book, I talk about, we have a history of this. And it's primarily led by Black and brown activists in the 1960s. Okay. So for example, when Malcolm X Community College came to life in 1969, 1970, it was Black students that said, okay, we're going to fire the off-duty police officers from Chicago PD, and we're going to hire a Black-run, unarmed campus security force to police. It was students that created that phenomenon, right? It was students in New York who said that it's great that city colleges have free tuition, but they also must be open admissions, because public schools have not prepared Black and brown communities to compete in what was becoming the information, white collar, knowledge economy in the 1960s and 70s. So we have histories, right, of Black and brown students, of communities determining and demanding that schools be responsible to the degree to which they're engaging and pervading our lives. So the things I'm saying, are powerful and important, but they don't come out of anywhere. They're built on a history. And this came out of the tradition of Black studies. This is a moment when Black studies was understanding that it wasn't just about curriculum and Black and brown faculty, but they had an urban engagement component that was intimately tied to what they understood Black studies to be.
Yeah.
So I think we should understand that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that history. I want to kind of pivot now to questions from our audience
Sure.
that we got in. And somebody has asked about the role that unions have played, for better or for worse, in terms of the expansion of the Ivory Towers. And you talked here a little bit about, activism that was, kind of calling the Ivory Tower to be accountable. But
Right.
Can you kind of give us just a thumbnail there?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples. So for example, when this book came out, I was able to interface with a long-standing labor-driven collective action project in New Haven, Connecticut, called New Haven Rising. But this is a formation that goes back for at least 2.5 decades, and it was this coalition because Yale University has such a powerful hold over the whole city of New Haven. As I was saying earlier, these universities have such a powerful. It's very similar to Charlottesville in a certain kind of way. Has such a powerful hold that so many people were connected to the university. So the coalition became residents, students, and labor organizing, unite here. And they came together to create New Haven Rising to push back against the various ways in which Yale was pervading their lives. I worked with them over the past summer. They were able, and again, it's small, but able to push Yale through our coalition building, to push Yale to contribute. They already contribute a $14 million pilot, payment in lieu of taxes, which is a piece of a $40 billion endowment. So let's be clear about that. But they are now contributing an additional $10 million a year over the next 6 years to compensate for property tax abatement. That's small. Some people might dismiss it as symbolic, but the importance of it is what it does is it sets a precedent to say that universities do hold a fiscal responsibility to their host communities. It sets that tone, and that's important.
I'm glad you brought up pilot programs.
Go ahead.
Yeah. If you can say a little bit more about that, I mean, since we're kind of talking about activism here and stuff, there has been student activism around pilot, that is payment in lieu of taxes, programs, and to what degree of success have these had?
Yeah, so there are various pilots all over the country. Some to varying degrees of success. Many times it's predicated on the degree to which the pilots are this isolated give, if you will, that doesn't touch all the other ways in which the university shapes the city or the town or the community. But so for example, Yale offers the biggest pilot in the country with $14 million a year. But again, because it's on a $40 billion endowment, it's a drop in the bucket. And it doesn't have the impact in the large sense that you would hope for it to have. Activists Penn for Pilots at UPenn, they've been pushing for a pilot. Instead of giving a pilot, the university offered a $100 million gift, so $10 million over 10 years to eradicate the asbestos in public school buildings, because those activists were able to demonstrate that there's asbestos and there's poor conditions in our public schools because of the taxes that universities don't pay to the cities. They show the direct connection. Yeah. But again, symbolic, but still important. Providence, Rhode Island was one of the early forerunners of pushing and successfully getting a pilot from Brown University. In my home state of Massachusetts right now, since 2012, there was a voluntary pilot system, because Boston is a huge college town, right? There was a voluntary pilot program whereby all schools that had over $15 million worth of property were being asked, because again, you can't force schools to offer this. It's in the law. You can't force it. We're being asked to contribute at least 25% of the value of taxes that would come from those properties if they were properly assessed. No school gave 25%. But during the pandemic, there's been this push to make that program not only mandatory, but statewide. And I'm working with groups all over Eastern Massachusetts right now, with Somerville Stands Together being a primary focus because of their relationship with Tufts University, and the social movement group called Another Tufts is Possible, trying to get the county to properly assess what's happening on these campus buildings. And that's something I want to push with Charlottesville right now, that with this affordable housing initiative, with the living wage campaign, a real lost opportunity that I think, and I know there's a coalition amongst various labor groups on campus. One of the major campaigns that needs to be pushed is to getting the county of Albemarle to assess what's happening at Discovery Park, what's happening on these university campus grounds, because alongside ASU, UVA is one of the key schools that is using its tax-exempt status to shelter for-profit initiatives. So I would encourage you all, that should be one of your next programs, to begin to assess what's happening on these campus blocks that is for-profit and that is purely educational, and requiring UVA to kick in the taxes for those blocks that are producing for-profit initiatives.
That's an excellent suggestion there. And definitely, I know there's a bunch of folks out in the audience here that are taking that to heart. I got a question from the audience here about, how did you choose the universities you examine in your book? And were there any that you considered but ended up not including?
That's a great question. So yeah, real quickly, if you read the beginning of the book, I was actually doing archival research, unrelated, in Chicago, because I studied Chicago. I studied the Midwest of Chicago, where I'm from. I'm from the Midwest, not far from Chicago. And I was doing totally unrelated scholarship. And I came out and history was hitting me in the face. There was a big campaign, and this was the instigation for the project in the recent past, because residents of the Brownsville neighborhood were protesting the University of Chicago's purchasing and lifting of an historic landmark blues club and moving it to the campus commercial corridor in Hyde Park. And that became the instigation for this whole project. So Chicago was the first place. Then I was talking to people, and they're like, oh, well, you got to talk about, these other schools. And I had a scholar friend, Andrew Ross, who had just done a project on Phoenix. He's like, well, Phoenix has just produced, ASU just created a downtown campus, and it's only 6 years old. You got to talk about that. And then I had gone to graduate school in New York. And so I looked at NYU and Columbia. And then of course I wanted to do my home institution. I felt like it'd be hypocritical if I didn't do my own home institution. So kind of a snowballing effect. But what this also did was it also gave me a range of different institutions, large private Research One universities, large public research-run universities, small liberal arts colleges in the East Coast, in the Midwest, and in the Southwest. So I wanted to also have a range of institutions in terms of location and also kind. So this is kind of how it came about. Places that I would have done if I was doing work on USC Village, which I do mention a little bit in the book, but that was going to be a bigger project. I was investigating Duke's decision and power to stop the light rail coming through that region. So talk about power. They call Duke the plantation, as they also call UVA. And so those were a couple of other places that I kind of wanted to look at. But the important thing about the book is powerful is that most academics look at the book as the endpoint. And the amazing thing about this kind of work is that the book has been the provocation. It's been the launch pad. The book has been just the beginning. And so with my Smart Cities Lab, I've been able to engage in coalition building, in consultation, in advocacy for community groups everywhere from Baltimore to Philadelphia to Berkeley to Houston, Texas to Miami, Florida, all these communities that are figuring out ways to have better relationships, to demand better relationships with their surrounding universities. And so this book has taken on a life of its own. And I'm very proud of that in ways that I could never have imagined. And it was just the launch pad, whereby many academics see it as the endpoint. It's the finished product. And for me, it's just the beginning.
Well, that's wonderful to hear the connection that you're making between scholarship and activism. Can you, maybe we'll, in a follow-up email, I want to send the web address for the New Cities Lab that you're talking about, that is a resource for activists, community members, advocates on the ground in various college towns, around the country, because I'm sure that would be very useful, to a lot of our listeners here today,
Exactly. And let me just say that we're actually trying to get the website up online right as we speak, because this took on, after the summer of 2020, this took on a life of its own. I thought it was just going to be kind of a consultation, information sharing thing. And community said to me, no, we've read the book, we see the articles, we demand you advocate for us. And I've been happy to do so. But at the current moment, please hit me on Twitter at Davarian Baldwin. We talk on Twitter.
Yes,
and
you do.
Let's keep that conversation going. And those of you out there who want to talk more about Charlottesville, or I just spoke to folks about the parodies between Charlottesville and Athens and Gainesville, so other southern cities, Birmingham with UAB. This story is still unfolding, and there's so much more to tell.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, hey, Dr. Baldwin, I want to say thank you so much for coming to speak with us. It's been, I've just been really excited about this. A lot of people have been talking about it here and online, looking forward to this conversation. And, these issues are, so important, here locally in Charlottesville and all around the country. I was just so nodding my head the whole time as I was reading your book, just seeing so many dynamics, that are repeated in so many places. And also, kind of hopeful, seeing the possibilities at University of Winnipeg, at in Buffalo, New York, with land trusts, and there are ways, we have ways of addressing this and holding universities accountable so that we can all live in a community in an equitable manner, that so that and it's all, and also so that these universities are actually realizing, their stated goals, in terms of public service. We all need to live together.
And let me just say that, as universities have this growing power over our city, we must hold on to the belief and the ethos that I hold, that another university is possible. Absolutely. Which is going to make another city possible, a different kind of urban democracy. And that's about building community. And I want to shout out your Center on Race and Democracy and your activism around Charlottesville as being a part of this community. And I also want to, make note of the amazing people that I've been in conversation with over 20 years in Charlottesville, like colleagues like Laura Goldblatt, Ange Kahn, Andrew Carl, mentors like Deborah McDowell and Ian Grandison and Marlon Ross. And then my homegirl scholar we go back over 30 years, called Drina Harold. And so this is just a building community. And I hope that with this conversation, it continues to just grow, because it's in our hands. Precisely those of us who are so connected to these institutions, we have the capacity to turn over their value. to retrofit these blocks in ways that actually serve the public good, that goes beyond just simply lip service and symbolism. And it begins right now.
I like that use of the word retrofitting. That's in the image, in the its correct image. Yeah, that's great. Wonderful. Well, I want to say, thank you to our audience for tuning in, and please consider buying In the Shadow of the Ivory Tower from your local bookseller or through the link that's been put in the chat. And you can explore other virtual events that are coming up with the Virginia Festival for the Book at vabook.org. Come and see us. And thank you, and have a nice afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye.